doesn't mean this part will be in. Afterwards, I kind of edit out. We do kind of like a beginning. But having said that, maybe this should be the beginning
We
before.
don't. We don't do a beginning. What
I,
kind
you
of
know, I'm a
bullshit?
little nervous because we have not one but two guests and both rabbis.
Oh, well, so I should confess now to my connection. I was a rabbi secretary for a year. While I was going to school, it was a job that I took on to pay my way through school. And I was Tifereth, Israel, which is a conservative, at least at the time. I don't know what
Right
it is
here
now.
in DC.
Yeah, on Upper Street. It was right across the street from an Orthodox
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, still
Yeah,
is. Yeah,
that's
we're
our
not
shul.
far.
That's our neighborhood shul, pretty much.
Yeah, and I was there probably for about a year, and the rabbi's name was A. Nathan Abramowitz, was known as Buddy, and I found it absolutely fascinating. It was really, really interesting. I actually don't think that a college student in their senior year is a really good choice for a rabbi secretary. I mean, I don't know what they were thinking, but I really appreciated the opportunity.
What was fascinating for you about it?
Oh my God, everything. So I was raised a Catholic. Uh, I was always fascinated with religion, and by going to Catholic University, I had to take 4 courses in religion. 2 of them are like 101 and 102. So you read like Sigmund Freud and Peter Bergen.
Yeah,
Yeah, sociologist who wrote at the time a lot about religion.
yeah.
And I really liked, and this is sort of, I think, rabbinical or in the Jewish tradition. I really liked Peter Berger/Bergen's commentary. It was about proofs of God's existence. And he cited 2 that have stuck in my mind. One was that we laugh. Where does laughter come from?
Mm.
And the second was that when a baby is distressed, the mother picks up the baby and coos and says, everything will be all right. And where does that across the world, across cultures response come from?
Mm.
And he would argue someplace quite deep.
Mm.
So anyway, I so by so I and I was had taken them. The other 2 courses I took was Eastern religion and modern American Protestantism. And so by being a rabbi secretary, I felt like I was kind of filling it out a little more. And the the whole ritual, um, the traditions. Like one of my jobs was to send out the yard site cards. All the special foods. I have to say that the rabbi and I never got into any conversations about the tradition. To the extent I had conversations about the faith, I had them with some of the congregants who would take me out to lunch, or they were nice to me. And so I remember having a few conversations with them. But the relationship between the rabbi and me was pretty utilitarian. So anyway, super fascinating. I just I felt like as a result, I learned a lot. Oh, how can I forget this? So there were various congregants, or you don't call them congregants, you call them,
Yeah.
We do actually.
who would come to the shul. They were lonely older people. And one of them was named Fanny. I know that's not much of a clue among women of that generation, but I think it was Fanny Hoffman. She lived somewhere on Upper 16th Street in some apartments, and she took a liking to me and started asking me to have lunch with her, and I would, and we would go to like the hot shops. If you grew up in the DC area in the 1970s and the 80s, they died in the 80s. They were just cafeterias, you know, where you could get an inexpensive meal. And she told me a lot about her family, and I, went to her apartment and all of that. And I treasured uh, those. Maybe it was at most three like encounters that we had, but those were very meaningful to me. And I'm sure she was like 80 at the time. So that's my exposure to Jewishness.
Well,
Yeah.
besides being secretly Jewish.
Well, that's what Julia claims.
Oh, okay. Well, yep. There's all sorts of ways to be secretly Jewish too. So,
Well, so Rabbi Josh, Rabbi Daria, we do our usual thing where we just get going, and then right about now we remember to introduce people. And really, we don't introduce people. We just say, we're so excited to have you here. Would you introduce yourselves?
nice.
So, have at it.
If you're ready, you're welcome to start.
I'm Rabbi Josh Jacobs-Velde. I been mostly working as a rabbi in congregations of different kinds, from established ones to startup ones. But almost all that time of that, I don't know, like 14 years or so, 15 years, has been sharing the rabbinic leadership with my wife, Daria. And we've been at a congregation in Laurel, Maryland, called Osei Shalom, a Reconstructionist congregation, for just about 8 years now. It's just been the longest stretch that we've had living anywhere in our adult lives, pretty much, let alone working at a job. And I have a deep love and passion for the Jewish mystical tradition and Jewish contemplative practice, contemplative prayer and meditation, and also have a lot of connections to other traditions, particularly Buddhism over the years, but others as well, and nature-based traditions and so forth. So that's a quick one.
Yeah, and I'll add, right, so neither of us grew up thinking we would be rabbis. Josh was, we'll talk about him being immature sixth grader, giving the Hebrew school teachers a hard time, and for me, I only had a half year of Hebrew school actually. I didn't get to go to the bathroom when I wanted or get a drink of water when I wanted. So like, why should I do this thing that I had chosen to do? Other friends, I was living in the Boston area. Other friends went to Chinese school, Hebrew school, some kind of a school. So I said, hey, mom and dad, can I go to Hebrew school? So I went, and then I was like, what? Look at these crazy restrictions. This doesn't make sense. So I dropped out.
So you were being homeschooled before then?
For Jewish education, yeah, homeschool of like celebrate some holidays. We were a Hanukkah Passover family, and singing songs. And so I grew up, I would say, as a cultural Jew, is what some people talk about. And so not really knowing much about the religion, and the pieces that I did learn about were really, right, there was the warm fuzzies, I call them, of like Hanukkah and Passover and candles and family and food. And then there's going to the synagogue with my grandparents in Ohio, and other times with my dad, and that's like off-putting and distancing and looking in the prayer book and the translation of the Torah that we would be looking at as like very off-putting and distancing. And I don't even remember what I learned about Israel or ultra-Orthodoxy or different things, but somewhere along the line learned enough to also really be put off by what, right, real Jews, meaning religious, like super religious Jews who, look really different, and they're doing everything. What they're doing Like, well, if that's really what Judaism is, I was Jacobs, he was Vandervelde. Let me change my last name, disassociate from Judaism. Like, it's not worth it to have the warm and fuzzies and also have blood on my hands because of what other people are doing and guilt by association. Let me disassociate from that as much as possible. And so on my roundabout journey to the rabbinate, one of the things that I did is I lived in Israel for a year in college, not because this was the path, but was in Haifa on a kibbutz, friends with a Bedouin family. Really wonderful experiences sociologically. I was a sociology major. Came back, graduated from college, went to Japan, had another sociological experience, being I thought I was a minority in Greater Boston. There, I was like, oh, there's 3 Jews in this whole prefecture. It's the size of Massachusetts. I'm from Massachusetts. Wow, okay. There's no anti-Semitism because they don't know what to be anti, right? So, like a whole different perspective. Now I'm suddenly an expert on Judaism because I lived in Israel and I know Hebrew and I know some things. And just living my life, I'd say the way I lived my life was just kind of sensing into what makes sense right now. And that continues in its next, in its iterations and unfolding. And it's what Josh was talking about, this is the longest we've been somewhere. In that living of my life, it's like, what am I here to do? And either intellectually thinking that at some level or just in my gut, knowing that there's something still here for me. So in my last year of Japan, being in Japan, I was there for 3 years. I went to Indonesia. And at the beginning of those 3 weeks, was on a night train with a Canadian friend, not Jewish, and talking to the guy across. And he said, what I thought was, what's your religion? And so I say, well, I'm culturally Jewish. I don't know the other stuff I want to figure out. I'm going to take it or leave it. He said, well, actually, I'm Christian. And I suggest you don't tell anyone else you're Jewish because you're in Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim population in the world, and your life could be in danger. All right, so again, I just kind of lived my life as one thing another. What's interesting, what's exciting, what are things I need to be doing? And now here I was as an almost 22-year-old, and like all of Jewish history is suddenly right in my face in a way I was completely unprepared for. And over those next 3 weeks, I kept encountering people, friendly this, friendly that. And then, what's your religion? What do I say? Convert or die. How many times has that been the Jewish story? And now it's mine. What am I going to do about this? And the Holocaust was horrible. What would be even more horrible, I realized, is to be an ambivalent Jew caught up in the Holocaust, not knowing one's relationship to Judaism. Like that would be really bad, wouldn't it? Like, if you're connected to the Judaism and you're like, this is just what's happening. Okay, that's one thing. And if you completely disassociate and like, okay, I'm still caught up, that's another thing. But to be in that ambivalent place, like not yet knowing. So I decided I wanted to learn more, figure out where I wanted Judaism in my life. Could it be helpful? Who knew it could be? So that, took us to different places and congregations and doing this work of what else is possible though. Like what else is possible in the world? So much. And the world that we live in is so much a reflection of like who we are and how we are. And so those are just it's just so fun to be alive sometimes. So I'm a person who likes to be alive and be curious and ask questions and think about puzzles and how things can fit together and what else is possible for the sake of human thriving and thriving of all beings on this earth.
Wow. All right. Amen.
So that's a
Josh,
little bit about me.
Josh, are you at all like when Daria, like that? Daria has her story at the tip of her tongue about the changes in her minds and in her mind and her minds around all of this and her soul. Do you have a similar sort of tip of the tongue story? Or I think that you're a more internal processor. And so I wonder, but maybe I'm wrong and maybe, so I just want to ask you the question is like, do you have a story like that about how you shifted around and where you are now? Or is it beyond words right now for you?
in terms of kind of like my rabbinic path. And
or
so
anything that happens to come out of your mouth after I ask that question.
eh, um, I I no, I can give you a sense of things. As Daria was saying, I didn't grow up with much of a meaningful exposure beyond like a very superficial suburban Judaism in a very assimilated family. But I
Were you also in the Boston area or somewhere
no,
else?
I grew up in St. Louis, but I got kind of more interested in sort of existential philosophical questions in high school. I had this amazing philosophy class with this teacher who really ignited there were a lot of really smart kids in that class. We had amazing discussions in the senior year, and then in college I discovered meditation, and originally through an Indian tradition, and then kind of a Zen tradition. And so I had this kind of deeper spiritual interest for, really since that like 11th, 12th grade time. And I'd include like Bob Dylan in the mix of that, like 11th, 12th, like that. That was also like, moved it along. And so it's kind of been, it was like following that spiritual interest. And then I was able to discover uh, deeper Jewish teachers which I had no access to, mostly through the Jewish Renewal movement. Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, the founder of Jewish Renewal, and also Rabbi Miles Krassen, who's still a very important teacher for me, and others as well. And I was like, oh wow, there's like both amazing depth here, and then I'm seeing, so much of spiritual practice is like, well, what is it like? The proof is in the pudding of like, how does it actually change one's being, right? And I saw that a lot with Zen teachers, some very powerful beings that were not famous teachers or anything like that, but they were just like, whoa, there's something going on with this person. And then so I was starting to experience that with some Jewish teachers as well, and then that kind of like connected up this whole like emotional level of Jewishness, which I had been exposed to at a it's kind of unconscious level growing up, but I wasn't bringing together with my spirituality,
Can
and
you
so
give
I
an
was like, oh,
example of what you mean by the emotional?
like I have this very intermarried family, but I was blessed to grow up with a lot of family around. So I grew up in St. Louis, and so there's like a very specific way that like Jews who grew up in that era, who grew up in the 30s, 40s, and 50s in all Jewish neighborhoods. Maybe they didn't speak, at least Ashkenazi Jews, maybe they didn't speak Yiddish, but they kind of grew up with the modes and the inflections and so forth. And those were just like the people who were, from my grandmother to some great aunts, but I was just exposed to that, and I didn't, it got in there, and at a kind of like deeper level of like, oh, this is kind of part of my being. And then I discovered that that's actually none of those people were spiritual or practicing, but that was kind of another like heart-based emotional kind of transmission through, because so much of Judaism is about, as well as this whole the whole lineage piece, and kind of coming from this, it's wonderful and it's somewhat crazy at times, like with all of the trauma and the different neuroses and all of the stereotypical things about American
Which are
Jews
true.
in the US.
Yeah.
And but it was powerful to be able to bring those things together, the
Mm.
spiritual and the emotional, in a way. So I was kind of often running with the spiritual teachings and then, through the mystical tradition. And that's kind of what's really been my nourishment for these years. But,
Wow. Thank you.
yeah.
I met Josh and Daria in Sebastopol, California, like something like 10 years ago, 12
So
years
that's
ago.
where they were?
Yeah, they were there. I was there. I lived there. We all lived there. And I was bemoaning that there wasn't a Jewish community that I was interested in. There were Jewish communities, but they seemed really intellectual, kind of humanist, not a lot of discussion of God or ritual or anything that felt connected at a deeper level to me. And then I found these two doing these outdoor Shabbats and celebrations. And I was like, this is great. Yeah. Yeah. You two are real innovators in this space. Like, first of all, just innovating with sharing the rabbinical position. I am very curious, what is that like for you? How do you do that? I mean, so there's this, you're a male and a female. Traditionally, rabbis have been men. So you're sharing that. So that's interesting. And then even if you weren't two different genders and you were sharing the same position, there's always, when people are sharing something like that, where you're kind of a leader, but you're sharing leadership, there's always a question of how that's going to work. And are you open to talking about that? Because I'm fascinated with sharing power.
I'm fascinated with talking about power and learning more about power. So I always appreciate any opportunity to gain more insight. And but I also just want to first just back up a second and stop and just say it's always such a pleasure being with you, Julia. And like what a gift from that, the shared connection across the ocean, across the land and the ocean and whatever the whole across this earth. And to be able to be connecting on this side, and Carmen to have had a little bit with you and to have watched your guys, some of your sessions with other people. So it's just such a pleasure to be alive at this moment with both of you, with you, to explore and see what unfolds during this time.
And I think you have a child. At least I saw one in the doorway.
Yes, there are two. So we get to share on that level too, multiple things. Yeah. How I talk about it is it's a lot of tag team, I feel like, with having a partner who understands the system to be able to brainstorm bigger issues and troubleshoot different things, and also add a level of perspective in a way that, right, somebody who knows me, and if somebody from the congregation is saying, well, da 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 da, and coming across with how they're experiencing me, and Josh can understand their perspective, and he knows what drives me because we've been married for close to 20 years, he can say, oh, you know what? I think what's going on is this actually. So it's really like just the other day when you shared about that, it's just such a fun gift. There's times when we disagree about different things, and but then there's also just we have different strengths and interests, and so you get to do more of what you want and say, tag, that one's for you. For some different things, and also support one another in growing and just in the balancing of the life work balance of, okay, wait, I've got all these different things and there's a pastoral need or a life cycle that comes up, right? And it's like, okay, tag, can you do that one? So
Well, so that's okay. So as you're talking, I'm hearing you and I believe everything you say, but I see Josh doing this
I
and
know
this.
exactly. I was
And so,
just,
no,
that's
no,
what
no.
I thought too.
Yeah, that was
I feel
actually,
like Josh is like, no. So I want to know what's
oh,
going on in Josh's
And
head
I
when
was
you're
gonna give
saying
him
that.
I was gonna let him speak first. I was like, I let him speak first last time, so I'll speak first
I
this
have a
time.
terrible poker face, but that actually was just unconscious. I agree with everything that she said there. That's weird.
He
Oh,
does go
really?
like this when he means, and maybe you're India
Yeah,
based.
maybe.
Oh, yeah, that is an Indian thing. They say that means yes to you, Josh.
He lived in India for 9 months, so
Oh, that
It
really
was a
could
while
be.
ago.
it was, but those
I have no
things go
idea what
in
was
deep.
going
Those
on
things
with that.
go in deep.
No idea what was going on with that. No, I agree
Okay.
with all that. I guess I would also add kind of the yeah, just like the thought partner quality of like being able to run things by, we have different like if it has to, I'm more text oriented and historical and intellectual history of ideas and flow of ideas. That's not for thing.
Me too.
It has emotional intelligence that is like on another, a completely different level of categorically different level than mine, energetic sensitivity that is on a categorically different level than mine, Um, so, it's, and for a long time, we split things because we had our kids were younger and it was just like it made the most sense. And it's only actually more recently that we've kind of realized that, oh, wait, our kids are notably older. We don't need to like be at home with them. So there are some things that
Different
we,
reasons to be at home with them still, of course, because like you
well,
need to
yeah,
be a parent also.
yeah,
But
but
it's a different thing than like, can I find a babysitter? I
right.
can't, and so or right nursing or something, right? So like, there's anyway.
Yeah, so there's different like we just kind of co-led the synagogue camping trip 2 weeks. I mean, really, she did a lot more of the logistics and some of the holding space, and I got to just sort of plug in and say, like, okay, you teach this, tell, some kind of Jewish nature teaching with text and experience in the afternoon. And I'm like, okay, great. And she's more holding the flow of things and but I didn't have to really hold the flow, but I'm leading this service. So that was a nice, well, I mean, it was a nice balance. I mean, you did it wasn't really a balance. I mean, it wasn't an example of how we might share together and call on our different capacities.
So where did you go camping? That's what I
We
want to know.
we were at the Pearlstone Retreat Center, which is this wonderful Jewish retreat center in Reisterstown, Maryland.
Oh, okay.
That's there. They have like 180 acres, and they've been there for a while and have done a lot of wonderful caretaking of the land. And it was our
Nice.
first time actually being there. We'd been in state parks before, but that was very
Nice.
sweet. Be there.
Fourth annual camping trip. I wonder how it started.
She made that start. She's really great at, like, sometimes it can be a challenge for people, but she's like at forceful at like making things happen and catalyzing them. And
Yes.
she's more of a visionary in certain ways, and like sharing her vision with everyone and so forth, which is different than mine. I'm kind of more interested in like, yeah, this, I'm doing my thing. This is kind of the thing. This is how it works. If you're interested, I'd love to go deeper with you. Let me know, and it's kind of just, it's a little more chill. And she's much more like, this is the vision of like, of where we need to go as a human species. And I'm
Yes.
okay, I have not as much clarity about that perhaps at this point.
Yeah.
So on the question of power, which sort of started this particular part of the conversation, I'm actually doing a talk tomorrow, a virtual talk on diversity, equity, inclusion, the way ahead. It's a conference, and I'm doing the keynote. And I don't know, think of it as keynote. It's like the first talk, which I think I'm supposed to be relevant but not heavy. Kind of set a good tone. And I've been reading a lot about what went wrong with DEI, what people think went wrong with DEI. And one of the phrases that I wrote down that I'm going to use tomorrow is that power corrupts purpose.
Hmm.
That from what I've read, what I've understood, that after the George Floyd tragedy, DEI ideas became really powerful in a lot more organizations. And there's a sense so if you have an idea, you want to make it so. You want to make it exist. You want to give it life. But there's a paradox or enigma. I can never use any of those words correctly. Irony, paradox, enigma, I don't know. But anyway, that power corrupts the purpose.
Mm.
Or it certainly can. Doesn't I don't think it has to, but it certainly can. And it might, given human frailty, it might become
Did Carmen just freeze?
Yeah.
She did.
they
Oh,
become
there.
powerful, and they become powerful for a really good reason. But um, by becoming powerful, they get tempted or fall into these practices that corrupt their purpose.
That is,
Sorry,
oh,
what was the subject of that sentence?
yeah, when you froze for a second.
Oh, I know. I
Who's
noticed
they
that I
who
got a
get
little signal. So,
who's
what I
they who
wanted,
get powerful? Yeah,
people gain power
yeah.
and then for a purpose because they want to make what they believe to be a positive change. But the very act of becoming powerful, it doesn't have to corrupt your purpose, but it almost seems like it's rare for people to avoid that the power corrupts the purpose.
But
Anyway, I just wanted to share that because you said you were really interested in power, and that was something that came to my mind just yesterday, actually.
I think there's a corollary there, Carmen, that I also want Josh and Daria to speak to if you think that this is also a corollary. But I think this is a corollary, which is that when the vision is to try to change people, change the culture, change anything, and you legislate and regulate that change, that never works as a way to change culture.
Oh, absolutely. That is one of the, uh, a culture of compliance is a, a very uh, strong way to go. I mean, it's not always the wrong way to go, like traffic signals, compliance, good. But
Kind of beyond that, though.
yeah.
Yeah. All right, Josh and Daria, go for it. Solve this problem.
I'm going to start by saying that as Josh was saying, like I have a vision and I want to make it happen. One of the things actually,
You want to share it. Not necessarily me.
I
Anyway.
think you said like I want to
Maybe I
make it
did.
happen.
Okay, fine. I probably
I mean, because there is, right?
Sure,
Like,
okay.
wouldn't that be nice at some level? But I think the deeper truth is actually I can be a lot less attached to it than what people experience when they experience me in a passionful state, I think. And it's one of the things that I feel like I've been learning over and over and over again is like, you just don't know. I'm not supposed to be a rabbi because I'm a Hebrew school dropout. So why would I be a rabbi married to a rabbi when I was like, Judaism in the synagogue? And I wasn't going to have children because the state of the world, like 30, 45 years ago, whatever number of like years ago, was a mess then, and I didn't want to bring kids into it. So what am I doing with two children? Right. And then on and on. There's a number of different things I could keep going of like why I'm not supposed to be here right now in this situation. Right. The last one was last spring when Zeb said to me, my younger son, I need to homeschool. And I was like, right, I'd learned this lesson enough to have it on my radar so that when he said that, and I knew that that was the last thing on my, what I call my I never bucket list. I never am going to be a homeschool mom. Like I said that to people. I know it's true about me. Well, except for when Zev, and I know our relationship and I know him and I know da da da. So I cross my T's and I dot my I's because that's what our trained linear minds need to do to make sure we've done everything the right way. Because I was going to be a math science major and like da da da. And so I do that, but I know in my heart it's a waste of time because this is just actually the real truth is that it can be a lot more fun to have questions and to be in the questions and the not knowing can be so juicy and fun and possible. So I was just writing some of that down also as we were speaking in the earlier part of just like how much more fun it can be to get curious. And yet, right, like freshman year, a close friend of mine, I didn't realize that I was a person who liked to be curious and ask questions, but there's like two examples of it is whatever it was that I would do, his response ultimately would be like, curiosity got the cat and it's going to get you. Like that's what he would say regularly to me. And so that's what I know about me being a curious person. Oh, look at that feedback I got. And another feedback I got was when I was in Japan and my Chinese American friend came with her mother to visit me. Then we went to Hong Kong and China. And so there am I. So I'm asking questions. I'm in another part of the world and they know some answers. And my childhood friend, but she tells me at one point, like, my mom would really like you to stop asking so many questions. So of course, what's the knee-jerk response to a person in that is like, why? Right? Oh, sorry. Okay, I heard. I know, I just said why. Don't tell me anything more about it. I will try to stop asking questions. So there's that part of me that is just me that gets to now be like, okay, right. It's a lot juicier to just know like a step ahead, like not know a step, but to have a possibilities. I think this is a direction that really feels right. And like to let my whole body come online in response to that. With curiosity and like, and what else don't I know right now? What have I not experienced? What don't I know? What stories? What everything? There's something else that's missing still. So that together with, as we're talking about power, I guess one thing that lifts up for me is like, what do we even mean by power?
Mhm.
There's so many different things. And so I've spoken enough for the time being. I'll pass the baton and hear what Josh has to say right now. More straightforward response.
No, I don't know that I have. I don't know that I have.
That didn't stir so much for you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know if I, yeah, have so much to say about that.
Well, I associate myself with Daria, your comments about passion, because I, over the years, I've developed uh, what I believe is sort of a calm personality. But when I was younger, uh, and in fact not that long ago, and still to this day, if I come to believe something is really true, and particularly if I believe other people need to know what I've just learned or learned to appreciate, I become really passionate. And I think, Julia, maybe you've seen it once or twice. And I'm reminded of a comment a really good colleague of mine said to me 20 years ago when I was at the CIA and become really passionate about something. And I'm in his office telling him this with great passion. And he listens to me. And then his only comment at the end was, you know, Carmen, you're really scary when you get like this. And I was like, okay. I mean, it was good feedback because I didn't know, I didn't appreciate that his, and he knew me. We've been together since our entry into the organization, so he knew me very well. But I guess apparently he had never seen me in full passion until that moment. And so he said, "Well, you're very scary." And of course, if you scare people, it's very hard to communicate with them.
Well, he was scared. I mean, I think it would have been more accurate to say, I'm scared. Because I feel like that feedback is not quite accurate to say you're scary, because there are plenty of people who wouldn't be scared by that.
Well, I think that's a fair point, but he's probably not alone. I don't think he's not the only person. And I
Did it
that
discourage you from being passionate? I don't think so.
no, it didn't discourage me at all. It was just a useful moment of feedback. I was like,
Uh,
oh, he found that scary, so maybe I need
what
to
do you
keep
think
that
is
in mind.
scary about that? Do you think people feel that if you're passionate, you have more power? Do you think it's about power? What do you think? What do you think? Does anyone know? Does anyone? Because I can't relate to that being scared of someone being passionate. I actually have no idea what he's talking about. So I'm just like, what? So what do you think he was feeling?
Daria or Jacob? Jacob,
Or
right?
Josh?
Josh.
Yeah.
Josh,
People call him
sorry.
Jacob all the
Jacob,
time.
All the
Jacob,
time.
that's the last name. That's right. Yeah, or part of the last name. Yeah.
You probably have a particular insight into this
I,
because you've
I
seen
yeah,
them.
yeah. No, well, right. Well, it's what comes to mind is like I mean, this is kind of even a little into our personal dynamic, but like, I sometimes like really big energy is difficult for me to be around.
Interesting.
And it's different. Like, obviously, you want to hear. I mean, usually when people are passionate about something, it's infectious, But I guess maybe for some people, especially maybe when it goes like 0 to 60 very quickly, just um, yeah, I just had that insight vis-a-vis Daria, I don't know, a month or month and a half
Mhm.
ago that like, there's just something kind of unconscious level of discomfort, like when she's really in certain expressions of her fuller big energy, that can, it's like, okay, it's a little too much, right? And there's a gender dynamic with that,
Yes, of course.
as well, I think, and because in certain, and sometimes I can like shift into a deeper grounded place, and or oftentimes actually, and then she can just be in the fullness of her being. That's kind of the ideal, and I can just be there receiving it in my grounded place, but it's kind of like this, yeah, it's like a smaller part of me, uh, that is like, yeah, it's little too much. It's like a little, and so that might have been what was going on, um, for that guy, and he was a guy, right?
Yes, he was a guy.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's some kind of, I mean, I'm CIA 20 years ago, like I'm assuming that the gender dynamics were not quite at perfect parity yet.
But now they are, I'm
And I'm
sure.
sure now they are, but I mean, so like women in their passion, so I think there's something of that going on as well, but I think also just some people are like, big energy can be challenging for people
Because
to receive for multiple reasons, but part of it is definitely gendered.
Well, I mean, my sense is because we don't live in a culture that gives space to it in any normative ways.
Right.
And so what we're then are modeling
Yeah.
is like
Right. Of our norms
such,
are, yeah, we are well, I mean, we're not quite Japan.
no, right? I lived in Japan. I
God,
know what
but
that's like,
But the norms are very tight. And
It's
so
they
the
still,
are very
risk
tight.
is the risk is that you're hysterical. Like that's especially for a woman, right?
at
I,
any
I,
level of big energy, right? Right.
Yeah.
Hysteria to like a bulldog to like whatever it is, there's got to be a negative shame, blame, get the fuck small.
Yeah.
another thought I have,
Get the
well,
fuck small. That's so good.
it's objective in the sense that it talks about something presumably you could measure. So I had some, I came across someone I had been mentoring 20 years ago, or more, actually more like 15 years ago. And he told me about a piece of advice I had given him that had a huge impact on him, positive, thank goodness. And that is that I told him he was a slow thinker. And I
Mm.
was observing him, and I could just tell that the way he processed information was a slower than the way I processed information. Didn't make him dumber or anything. It was just like a CPU issue, you know? And he said, I hate it when you told me that, but as I've gone through my career, it's made more and more sense because he said, I'll be, he's a partner with a consulting firm, and I'll be in a meeting, and all the other consultants are like, well, I'm going to say this and I'm going to say that. I'm going to make these 3 points. They're getting ready for a client briefing. And he now has enough self-awareness that he says, I don't roll this way. I'm not going to be able to tell you what I'm going to say. I need to go home, get a good night's sleep, work on my briefing, but I promise you that tomorrow I'll be great.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, I mean,
Love
what
it.
an awesome thing,
Yes.
right? And I do think that there are people who just can't process a lot of ideas coming at them
Yeah.
in rapid succession, which is what happens to me. I just go from one lateral crazy jump to another, and so it's really a communication issue. I'm communicating in a way that doesn't work for them. And
Hmm.
so that's kind of objective. It's no one's fault. It's just we're all wired differently.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so part of it could, I do feel like Daria has a point about that get the fuck small thing. I think some of it is that. And I do think some of the gendered thing has nothing to do with that and is that on average, women and men do process language differently and women process it faster.
No, I didn't know that's actually
Yeah, that's very
uh,
clear. People don't talk about it because you're not supposed to talk about difference between the sexes, but nonetheless, this is very, very clear.
Mm.
And so there can be some fear because it's like, slow down. I actually didn't really get you, and I'm scared I'm not going to be able to keep up. So
Mm.
that could be a real capacity difference.
let me just tell you a quick story. You've reminded me of this. So, my ideal, most fantastic trip adventure is to go to Southern Africa. And I've been lucky twice to take friends and my mom before she passed on these tremendous trips. So on one of these, we were in Botswana, in Maun. I'm sure you've all heard of Maun, Botswana. So
I have
the
that.
airport is a building smaller than my house, divided into two halves, arriving, departing. So we were in a small plane, 30 people, and, probably equal men and women, moms and dads for the most part. The dads, I watched this in the waiting room. The dads had all gotten off the plane. I'm sorry, Josh. I don't mean this the way it's going to come across. The dads had all gotten off the plane and they were just, sitting around, whatever, sleeping. And every single mom was on high alert, looking at everything that was going on in the room, trying to anticipate whether there was what a danger point might be. Does everybody here look safe? Is this a safe environment for my kids, et cetera, et cetera?
Mhm.
And I remember thinking, this is fascinating because all the moms are like, and the dads are like seemingly not paying attention. I don't, that's probably unfair, but I did observe that once.
Well, it's
Mhm.
interesting that then in that, if let's say that's a generalization that resonates with many people, and I think it does, not maybe nowadays, I think dads are doing more work, but back then, it's still interesting that most intelligence operatives were men. If women are essentially trained by their children, moms are trained by their children to have hypervigilance around their situational
Well, my
awareness.
my friends who are women who are in operators, case officers at CIA, all to a person say that women made the better case officers in for several reasons. Empathy came more naturally to them, and powers of observation came.
Mm.
They were just better at it. Again, I don't know. I cannot. These are analog stories. I can't
Well,
substantiate it.
it makes me think of when we were in California and part of our what we got into that's impacted and informed our lives a lot is the deep nature connection mentoring world. And John Young is one. He's out in Santa Cruz. We got to study with him some then, and since then, and he's close with a San Bushman tribe, and so through that, learning more about the San Bushmen and Africa. We hoped to get to Botswana, but we didn't get to. Um, And so learning about the hunter-gatherer tribes and what the roles were and how people were operating and all the senses that were enlivened, of course, in a way of ease, right? You don't have the energy to be hyper vigilant. Like it's just okay. And you can just know, he tells a story of the women all like and the kids, and they're all, doing whatever processing of a something and hanging and talking. And he hears this bird alarm. And he goes over to his translator, like, what's that bird alarm? And the guy's like, I don't know. Let's go over to one of the guys in the tribe. And so he goes over and they're like, oh, I don't know. I think this and that. And they go, and then they go and they ask one of the women, did they find out then what it was? He goes and he asks one of the women, and the bird alarm's happening behind them. Here's like the women and the trees and the children, and they're doing their thing. And they're like, hey, do you hear that bird alarm? Yeah. What is it? Oh, well, there's a snake over there, and it's gonna like, eat this other animal, but it's not a dangerous one for us. As opposed to that's a snake that is dangerous for us. But meanwhile, I'm doing my thing here. Right. So one of the things I'm thinking about is just how the ease with which the women acknowledged and recognized and identified what that was. And two, also perhaps because the physical bodies of women would not be able to as easily perhaps defend a physical threat, the other powers of observation to be able to leave have to be extra heightened.
Ah, good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, good point.
Josh, how are you feeling about this? And how's Zev, who I just see open the
Yes,
door
he
back
needs to
there?
get something he just
Hi,
printed.
Zev.
Zev, you can say hi. Hello.
Hey.
Carmen, she was at the synagogue. Oh, yeah. Hello.
Hey.
In the movie. Yeah. At the Spy Museum, he recognized you. He's like,
Oh my gosh.
That was such an important movie for me, actually.
Well, I mean,
Your video,
well,
anyway, another video that was there was actually a turning point for me. But anyway,
okay.
Hi, Zev. Nice to see you. Josh, how do you how do you, as the only male in their current presence,
except for the one
how do you feel, except for the one that just came in? How are you surviving this conversation? Does it make you feel less than, or does it just sound like there are differences between the sexes?
Yeah, I think that there are differences. I mean, this plays out in our own, family. She's definitely much more attuned to like uh issues of danger with the kids. Or it's like I'm happy to let the gas light come on and then go to the gas station.
Yeah.
Never, ever, ever will that ever occur. I used to do that, but I haven't done that probably in 20 years because I just know that it's going to cause her to like go. And I like, okay, there's a gas station nearby. We'll then get gas. But so I mean, or I'll just we're close to the edge of the cliff. No, it's perfectly fine. We can be here and I mean, I can actually remember here. I can hear my mother like, yelling at my father for letting my brother and I get too close to the edge of the cliff. And so sometimes she'll do that. But so the protector, that like noticing piece. I think there is something to that. But I don't know. I think I don't really feel too qualified at this point to weigh in on the larger to extend that to a lot of other, things. Yeah.
I want to say something. When we first met, I had really short hair.
Oh yeah.
And people thought we were brother and sister. I know there's a picture of it, but it was really short. It was about, a little bit longer than Josh's hair. And one of the things, we met in 2003, started dating. The fall of 2003 is when we met and started dating, got married in 2005. So been together for a little while. And one of the things over these number of years is just the increased differentiation that I feel like, right? Not only did we look alike at some level,
Okay,
but there was just a lot more of, right? When you were saying before, we can't really talk about differentiation between men and women. And that's been for me, even like when I was friends with the Bedouin, like that was my introduction to there being a wonderful thing to just be with women and to be like in the women's space, even if it meant I was like washing my friend's underwear. Like, I don't know, I'd never washed another male's underwear, but I'm helping the women do the laundry. And we were at the Bedouin family because a university student who was, of course, male, who was a friend, right? So I'm like, I bet his underwear is in this mix of laundry I'm doing. There is not another guy whose underwear I've ever washed before, right? Like, so except for maybe family laundry. So that piece of like, oh, I grew up again, math science. Daria, going like into the math science, it'll be Julia, right? You'll be the only woman there. Carmen, I'm sure in your own, it'll be a great, right, opportunity. Okay, there's great opportunities perhaps. But oh, there's a gift to being in women's only spaces. There's a gift to being in a female body. Like that was a massive shift that came to me through when I was leaving California, actually in a class I was taking. So in that piece of there's a gift to being in this space. Oh, there, and what about the gift of men in a particularly different way? And how can we really lift up, not in a comparison, who's better, but just like the glory of differentiation, just like no two flowers are the same,
Yeah.
and get to know more and more of that. So
One of my
Appreciation.
one of my favorite things is to be at a baseball game. And I imagine Josh from St. Louis, you have to have been a baseball fan at some point.
I have been to baseball games.
Not a
But you're not a
fan.
fan. But
Maybe back in, I
or
think I got a little
Daria
excited
from
in
Boston,
82
but St.
82,
Louis
yeah.
is a particular baseball town.
when the
Anyway,
Cardinals were the series of, yeah. But
what I want to say is I love it when two or three men sit behind me or in front of me so that they can't know that I'm overhearing them. Guys like to go to baseball games together. And baseball is a soft sport where it's easy to have a long conversation during the course of a game. And I love listening to them talk
mm,
because that's about the only time I get a chance to get some information about what men do when they're with them, just with themselves, and
mm,
and how they talk. And some of the conversations are what I would expect. Some of them are occasionally surprising.
mm.
So while we're talking about things, we only have 1 minute left.
oh,
And the thing that we haven't talked about that you're not also allowed to talk about with rabbis is Israel. And I know we don't have time to talk about that. But I was wondering if you two have any one sentence parting wisdom, and we can maybe put a link to I think you made a beautiful statement on Israel with your synagogue.
yeah,
Maybe we could put a link to that if you're open to that.
I think I actually do have a quick, yeah, I think the single most important thing for the world, actually, I am going to make a big statement, is like, there's two peoples there. There has to be some kind of shared vision for being together. And this is like what has been so and is incredibly I'm super critical about what the Israeli government is doing it. I've gotten a lot of flack for it from in different ways in my professional life. But what has happened with the left in general is it's just become so dehumanizing of Israelis and where they are and like and negating of their even like being in the land. And this is like a weird thing that's kind of disconnected from reality of like there's Jews and there's Palestinian citizens of Israel. There's a huge number there, they're 20% of the population. There's amazing stuff that's happening on the ground there of people who are still holding this vision of shared society and living together and working things out creatively in a way that like the whole I understand in the absence of any kind of positive movement, it has caused this intense polarization that's on the left and right, that the right wing people are getting more violent, left people too are just much more extreme. And I just wish that everyone would would look into some of these, like, the organization in Israel Standing Together. There's another organization called A Land for All.
Two nations, one homeland.
Two nations, one homeland, is one example of that's a kind of larger solution with, Israelis and Palestinians standing together is a organization within Israel of Jews and Palestinian citizens of Israel, Jews and Arabs. But both of those are like living some kind of shared future. And we're in this very difficult situation where there's no clear, the two-state solution is difficult for most people to say, like, hey, we'll get there one day. And so there's not a clear vision, but these folks are like articulating possibilities. Daria's great at that. And so like tapping, and they're putting their lives on their line and their careers, and they have skin in the game in a way that all these activist people in the US and Europe and so forth don't, even though they get really riled up, and you can post TikTok videos and all that. But I'd say that's like the single most important thing, that kind of shared humanity piece, and like having, positive vision and taking direction from people who are actually there and living it.
And with those who have a vision of life,
Yeah.
Right? Like the executive director, the co-executive director of Living Together, of Standing Together, of A Land for All, said, we're either going to live together or we're going to die together. Like, let's just be real about it, right? And so, come on, world, come on, people. If you think you actually care, are you supporting life or are you supporting death? We have two very traumatized people who are continuing to, at many levels, continue the trauma as individuals are trying to create a vision of something else. So we can either be partners also in people living together or dying together. And that's the choice that's being made.
There's yeah.
And I want to just say another thing, actually, that I've been thinking of about what we were talking about, the male piece of like, I can protect against the lion, right? And a John Young story about, when the guys need to like rally themselves up to like attack the lion or steal the food. It was stealing the food from the lion, right? That power that men have to do that, that would be the men's role, not that women can't or whatever, but like traditionally in those ways, like that's amazing. And right now, it seems like that's the power that's only being used not only, but at so many levels being used for death and destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's time for those who see other possibilities to stand in a different capacity of power that I know is possible because of inspirational, not a ton, but like, oh, that person and that person. And it seems like you both know as well, what do we need to like amplify those ways of being that can stand up to men who are coming in with death and destruction, with other men who also have that capacity to just be solid, but not towards death and destruction, but for thriving in life, and to stay together and stand together and say, enough. You can put your gun down now. This is not helping you live.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what
I wrote down when you were talking. I was listening, but I was writing this down. So there's the digital revolution changed everything in ways that we're still discovering. It completely caught governments and ways of governance off guard. So really has, hurt authoritarian ways of governance, democratic ways of governance. It's turned everything on its head. But there's also, this is what I wrote down, there's also a sense in which the digital revolution offers people in groups the power to ignore government, little ignore, and set off to live the life that should be lived. Right? So on the one hand, the digital revolution has been destructive toward the power of government, but perhaps it can also be liberating and allow for these pockets of new ways to emerge and grow at the edges. So that's my hopeful take.
Okay, from that, Carmen, I am creating a new party. It sounds like libertarians, but they're the Lovetarians. And I'm very excited about it now that you've framed that. Thank you.
I
Well,
mean, like Valerie Kaur's stuff, the Revolutionary Love Project. I mean,
Yes.
they're amazing. They're
Yes.
like,
Lovetarians.
yeah, yeah. They're
Yeah. It's what you can do and you don't need any permission to do it from anybody.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, this was fun.
This was amazing. Thank you.
Well, it was more than just fun, but actually, fun
It
is
was
high
fun.
praise for me.
Yes.
When I say something was fun,
okay.
that's top notch.
Okay.
Agree.